88% of people worldwide are disengaged, disillusioned, and dissatisfied. And that at a time when we actually depend on their intrinsic motivation to get things done. Or as René West says, you can have the best building in the world or the best strategy, but if you don't have the heart and mind of people, nothing will come of it. So we need people to make things done. Let's talk real quick about the digital age or VUCA times. So there is no question about it. We live in volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous times. Or as the Chinese use a curse word, say, may you live in interesting times. And we can definitely say we live in interesting times. But what does it mean, digital transformation and digital age? So for many people, this means the pace of technology and all that stuff that is being reinvented every day. And it's mind-blowing what technology can do. If we think about something like 4D printing, that it's actually revolutionizing the construction business. Who would have thought you can revolutionize the construction through technology? But these things are happening in the space. And the problem is that a lot of companies think, oh, we're not a tech company, this doesn't concern us. But give me a company that is not a tech company in some sense, and it's also the age of disruption. And this is happening, and people won't see it coming. If you look at this, since 2000, 52% of the names on the Fortune 500 lists are gone. Do you think they saw this coming? Do you think they felt the need to change? Probably not, otherwise they would still be on the list. So what does digital transformation for you look for you? Look at these companies that haven't been around for that long. So the past 12 years, none of these companies have existed. And they revolutionized the way we approach work, the way we approach value. Who here is on Uber or Lyft? Does anyone? No one on Uber. So congratulations, you're a ruthless middle manager. So if you give someone a bad rating and that person gets a couple of bad ratings, that person is out. There are no improvement plans and annual appraisals. They are gone. So that's the algorithmic management that is taking place. But they also create experiences for us as customers. And of course, when we go into our workspace, we expect our companies to bring that experience and create that experience for us too. So it changes the way we look at things. And for HR, hi, welcome, come on in. For HR, the customer is employees, and we come in with a different set of values and different set of expectations. So it's no wonder that consumerization of HR was trend number 1 this year for HR. So these things are happening. But of course, we have other trends in the workspace. For the first time ever, we have 5 generations in the workspace. And that creates a different set of challenges than we used to have. And of course, the young generation comes in, and they are used to collaborate and communicate and have access to information and data. And they are not going to thrive in a traditional setting. So we have to create a different setting for them and bridge that generational gap. And of course, all this stuff that is going on in the workspace is a ticking time bomb for HR. And if we in HR don't change, that is going to blow up. And there is no question about it. We cannot approach HR with a traditional mindset. Whatever got us here is not going to get us in the future. So we have to change our approach if we want to make things happen. And that's where Lean Agile people operations comes in. And make no mistake, HR is your secret weapon to bring agility to an enterprise level. There is no way whatsoever that you can become an agile enterprise without actually fixing your people approach. And HR is going to go that way. We have some great HR people in the room today. We're going to hear other talks today from great HR minds. So they are going to go that way. But I know when I talk about at conferences about this and tell people that HR is going to get you there, you can see at least one person who rolls their eyes and say, okay, come on, seriously, HR? But some of the bad name that HR has, actually, doesn't come from HR. HR gets blamed for everything in the workspace, but then at the same time they love their processes and their tools. So we in HR have to learn to embrace those agile values and become different kind of leaders. But the question is, why should we actually care about people and engagement? And here is a business set. So I know most of you are leaders and you love data and facts. We developed this framework where we look at different revenue boosters, but at the same time also look at a return on investment. So how can we have a smarter investment into our HR organization? Behind these little tiles is all a set of different data. So there is over 100 data in that full set. I'm just going to share one up here from the business performance part. So if you have a highly engaged workforce, you have a 9% higher return on shareholder value, you have 2.5 more revenue, and you double your income. So how is that for hard facts about engagement? Because engagement is something that HR has been talking about for decades. So the concept of engagement is not new to HR, but it's always seen as sort of like soft, touchy feel stuff that HR does. It's not seen as hardcore business, but here we have to prove how that can affect and impact your organization. And so the role for HR must be to create those inspiring, engaging, and fun places of work. So most people get the inspiring and engaging, but when I say the fun part, it's like, what? No, we're there to work. We're not here to have fun. Of course, we are here to have fun too, because it's important that people enjoy what they are doing, and we should not forget that. It's a key part of it. But let me tell you something about what Agile HR means, because it's a term that is being used quite often these days. So, of course, on the one hand, we have the Agile organization that has to transform, that has to organize themselves around values. So we have value streams like engagement, culture, talent, and flow. But we also have Agile HR teams working in an Agile manner. So we have your Scrum and SAFe and Kanban and all these practices used in HR. But at the same time, we have another side of HR. So here we talk about the HR organization, but on the other side, we have HR as a discipline. So how does HR interact with the organization? How does HR support the Agile organization? How do they translate all those Agile values and principles into the services they deliver for the organization? And that's the hard part. And quite often when we talk about transformation in HR, what people think what they are getting as a result is this part here, where we talk about how do we recruit people, how do we onboard people. But at the same time, they think it's as easy as implementing Scrum. It's just about bringing Scrum to HR teams, but it's a whole different dimension. This one is the easier stuff. This one here is really the hard stuff. And we heard this morning about best practices, and I absolutely agree. Best practices are probably best somewhere else, so we can let ourselves be inspired by what other people do, but we have to find our own way. It has to fit our culture, our values. And we also heard this morning that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, guess what? People eat culture before they even get out of bed. So people are going to make this happen. So let's have a look at different Agile values and how they translate into the HR space. So usually when we talk about Agile HR, we go in and talk about practices like hiring and so on, and say, okay, how do we do that with an Agile mindset? Today, what I would like to do is that we look at different values. So I just chose a set of different values and talk about how do they affect our HR practices and how do we translate it. So the first one is Agile trusts people. And we've been talking about trust for so many years, and so many companies have trust on their value proposition. It's out there. But then when we look at the actual practices and policies in the workplace, we realize there is no trust whatsoever. especially in HR. So of course we have to say that HR sometimes really has to deal with the crooks and thieves. So literally, we don't always get to deal with the best people. So we have to deal with the troubleshooters and people where we have an issue. So sometimes we are disillusioned about our employees, but we have to change that. We really have to trust people. And it's easy to say, oh, you have to trust your people, but it's very hard to do. And trust is very fragile. It's like an eggshell. It can break really easily and you can't really mend it. So this is an important part. And the reason why we don't include it that much into our processes has to do with what we call the Douglas effect. So I want you to imagine the worst person or people you've ever worked with, and Douglas embodies all those bad habits. It's the slacker, it's the tattletale, it's literally the thief and the crook. So Douglas is the bad person, and in HR we're so used to create processes to keep Douglas in check. So we pre-script everything, we make sure that we can deal with Douglas. But instead we should be thinking about the best people. So I want you to imagine the best people you've ever worked with. Now imagine what your HR processes would look like for that group of people. How much would you have to script for them? Would you need expense allowances and policies, how to dress when you come to work and all that stuff? Or would you have a completely different attitude? And that's what we have to think when we re-implement new processes. How do we show that we trust people and that we believe in their intrinsic motivation and actually foster that engagement? So that's a very important part. I can share two completely different examples that go into the direction of trust. A pharmaceutical company said, okay, we trust our people with millions and millions of dollars worth of research and development and projects, but we tell them whether or not they can spend $2 on a cup of coffee. So that there is some kind of disconnect here. So how about if we just skipped our expense policies? So starting tomorrow, we don't have an expense policy at all, whatsoever. We trust people to make the right decision and spend whatever they feel is adequate. What do you think happened? And let me say, they did this in a pilot with 2,500 people, so it's a substantial group. What do you think what happened to their expenses? Yes, absolutely. It went down by 1/3. So they saved more than 30% in expense allowances, and that's just the actual payout. We are not even they didn't even calculate how much they gained by not having to check expense reports and having them run through different systems. The only thing they did, it was transparent, so everyone could look at everyone else's expense report, but it went down by 30%. And it also changed the culture because employees could feel that they were trusted. And another example comes from a manufacturing company. So on the shop floor, they had this room that was under lock and key where they kept all the spare parts and everything that people needed. So if your machine was broken, if you needed something, you had to go to someone and fill out a couple of forms and ask to have a couple of items released. And then a new CEO came in and said, hey, come on, we talk about trust. Let's trust people. Let's take away all the fence, all the doors. Everyone can just go in and grab whatever material they need. No control, nothing. What do you think happened here? Did employees steal just all the stuff under them? They didn't. In fact, what happened is that the machines ran better and longer and they reduced their maintenance effort because people took pride in keeping their machines up and running just because you trusted them. So I know trust is sometimes very hard, but it's very rewarding if you go that way. And it's showcasing something great. The next part is that we talk about Agile empowers people. And we all know about how we empower people in the way they work in Agile teams. But we don't talk a lot about how can we empower people when it comes to their own career. Because at the moment, employees can just sit back, relax, and say, okay, dear HR, tell me, what can you do for me? That's not going to be the future. We're going to empower people to take care of their own career, of their own learning. So of course HR is going to give them the platform to learn and give them access to learning opportunities. But at the end of the day, it's the employee who's in the driver's seat and who makes things happen and who decides, am I going to go to this course or am I going to go to a different training? So it becomes less prescriptive as well, because today it's like, okay, you're a senior developer or you're manager, those are the 3 courses that you have to take. That's not going to happen in the future. The future is going to be, okay, that's what we offer. Please pick and choose. Make the decision for yourself. Do you want to come to the Agile Leadership Day or do you prefer to do something else? So we empower people to take care of their own career. And of course, that's going to change the interaction with HR. And we see new roles emerging in HR. We have talent scouts and career coaches. So everyone gets an individual career coach who interacts with you and helps you shape your career profile and identify if you have skill gaps somewhere and how do you want to move forward. And we have talent scouts who know what's happening in the organization and can assess what skills are we going to need so that they can make you an individual offering. Because if they know that you want to move into a new role within 6 months, then you can have that dialogue and they will know, okay, there is something opening up at another team and we can make this happen. So that's going to fundamentally change the interaction we have with HR. And Agile is also about being honest and authentic. And HR struggles with that a little bit because we're all shackled by legal. So legal scripts all the dialogues, or most of the dialogues. So when it comes to recruiting, especially when it comes to performance improvement plans, it's all scripted by legal because legal is so afraid of lawsuits that they actually stop HR from having that honest discussion. And how can you have an honest, authentic discussion with someone if you get a list of questions that you're not allowed to ask, if you get a list of sentences and words that you're not allowed to use? And it creates this bad spiral, downward spiral, because the more we treat people in a less than honest way and push certain decisions out, the more they are frustrated and angry, the more they will take us to court, the more legal will come in and say, hey, we have to script even more. I know it's not as bad here in Europe as it is in the US, but in the US, if you're a company with more than 10 people, you have a 12.5% chance of getting sued. It's crazy, and I know we see more tendencies like that here as well. So we in HR have to get rid of that shackle of legal and start having those honest and open discussions. And that also concerns, or especially concerns, performance issues. So we follow that approach that we say hire slow, fire fast. Meaning if you see that something is not working out with a person for whatever reason, you make that cut immediately. You don't wait until the end of the year until you do the performance appraisal and then you create a great performance approval plan that takes you into another year and the second year and sometimes even a third year, and the problem is still not solved. And it's always about, we have to make sure that people get this chance. But if you know it's not going to work out, then make that cut and make it immediately. Because what we're not taking into consideration is how the bad performance of someone affects the people around that person. So if you have a bad apple, everyone who's directly linked to that person and has dealings with that person, their performance is dropping by 25 to 33%. So now multiply that by all the months and years that person is there. That's one aspect of it, and that's hard-earned money that you're just losing there just by not making that cut. And the other part is it negatively affects your culture because you're signaling to everyone else that behavior is okay. We accept that, and it reduces the engagement of all the people around that person. So we have to make sure that we're honest about these things. And it doesn't mean that they are bad people. It's just not the right fit. And maybe you find something for them within the organization, or if not, help them transition back into the workspace. So that these are important things, and that's part of being honest and addressing these things up front. Then the other part is that we respect individuality and individuals. That's an important part. In HR, we're very great at streamlining everything. We like our processes and procedures and scripting everything out. But we have to make sure that we interact with people and accept that they might not want to take on a leadership role, or might not want to move from one city to the other, or might not want to work full time. So how can we embody that, and how can we accommodate the needs of people? How can we make that work and help them out? And another part with individuality is also the concept of diversity of thought. So how do we accept different opinions, different ideas within our organization to help them thrive? Then Agile is about relentless improvement. And if we look at Agile ways of working, it's actually learning works of working. So Agile doesn't really differentiate between learning and working. So it's very fluid. But then, of course, HR has to understand what is modern learning, because knowledge that you learn today and facts that you learn today are going to be outdated tomorrow. So how do we teach people to deal with that changing fast pace of information and knowledge? How do we bring that into the organization? But then also, how do we embed training and development within the workflow? If you look, for instance, at SAFe, they have the IP iteration, where they give people time and space to actually learn and develop new skills. So how do we embed that in the work? So it's no longer, okay, it's October, you're still missing two trainings, off you go. So it's really embedded into the workspace. But it's not just a case of telling managers, oh, you have to let your people work on something and develop. No, we have to create those spaces and put that into the workspace, into the workflow. The next part is Agile is about transparency. So how do we bring transparency to our HR processes? And HR gets very nervous when they hear we have to be more transparent, because they immediately think, oh, this is confidential information, we're just going to publish everyone's data. But there is a huge gap between publishing individual personal data and bringing in transparency. And HR is also great at asking, well, but it's not going to change anything. Why should I give them access to certain data and information? It's not going to change anything. But that's beside the point. It's like if you wait at the bus stop and it tells you the next bus is approaching 2 minutes. It's great information to have. The bus is not going to get there any faster, but it's still great to have that kind of information and give them access. And of course, the biggest issue with transparency, or the biggest blocker, is transparency in salary systems. So people get very nervous about that. But we see that it actually creates retention if you're transparent about the way you get to a salary decision. So you don't necessarily have to publish every name with their salary. There are other ways to approach it. But it's great to tell people, how are we getting to that decision, and what are the factors that we consider? Because you don't want to have a salary system that goes by decibel. The person that shouts the most gets the most. And that's what's happening in most organizations, isn't it? So people who are maybe more introverted or are less vocal about their salary, they get lost out. And the more transparency you can bring in, the more you can have an upfront discussion before you actually have that issue, and the more it's perceived as being fair. Because people will know what goes into that decision. But then at the same time, the final decision about the salary is to be with the manager. And it's going to happen more than once a year. So it's not just HR comes in once a year, that's what you can do. The managers must be empowered to make those decisions. Up front. And regarding transparency, of course, you have to have your house in order before you just publish all the salaries. So you have to make sure that it works for you. But the more transparency you can bring in, the better. And I can give you an example from a chemical company. What we did there is they were very secretive about their salaries, and the culture was really, okay, you don't talk about pay. So what we did is that every employee got a salary letter once a year that gave them their reference role and the midpoint of their salary. So they would know, okay, I'm 89% to the midpoint, or I'm 110% above the midpoint. So I know, okay, I'm really well positioned. And that helped to bring in some transparency without just disrupting a long culture or long history of being very secretive about it. So there are different ways of approaching that, and it's really helpful to consider what's the best way of doing that. And then we have Agile is a team sport. We all understand what it means for work, but what does it mean for HR? And the best example here is recruiting. So who is making the hiring decision? Is it HR? Is it the manager? Or is it the team? And in our mind, there's no question. It has to be the team. Because the team decides whether or not that person is going to be successful. And we have to include the team in that process and in that decision. And there are great ways, for instance, if you hire IT people, you can do hackathons. I mean, you can even hack the hackathon and do a hack outside of coding, so you don't necessarily have to code. And these are great ways of creating a buzz, creating an energy, but also giving the people a chance to work with that person. Because once you've hacked with someone for a whole day, you know, do you like working with that person? Do they have the right skill set, the right attitude to make it happen for me and my team? But you also know, can I go out and have a beer with them at the end of the evening? And these are great pointers. And we have to stop hiring people from paper. So we're very great at just like streamlining all the resumes and then decide based on paper who we're going to hire. And we're also great about hiring the person who's best about talking how great they are. But that may or may not be the person who's actually best doing the work. Especially if you have in IT, you have a lot of more intrinsic people, introverted people who are great at conceptual work but may not be the best communicators. So how do you make sure that you have the right people? And if we look at hiring questions, we get questions like, how many ping pong balls fit into this room? Or if you were a superhero, who would you be? Well, how much is that question really telling you? Does that really tell you a lot about their agility? Or should you ask questions like, how do you flex your muscles? How do you improve? How do you react when you encounter the roadblock in your work? So we have to make sure that we ask the right questions to draw in the right people. But then the team decides. And then we keep up the energy. Because what happens today is that once you sign your contract, you don't really hear anything from your new employer until the day you show up with your first day. I know in the US it's just a couple of weeks, but here in Europe it sometimes takes longer before they start. So how can we keep up that engagement? For instance, Honkamöller, they have an amazing onboarding app where they have different video blogs and information nuggets that you can access. And it keeps up that energy, and people go out and say, hey, look at what my company is doing. I can't wait to start working with them. Or if the teams organize a social, just invite them to come in and get to know people. So keep up that momentum that you have, so that when they come on the first day, they feel like they've been part of that organization for a long time and can get started. So these are all great things to create that experience and make things happen. So we always get the question, well, do we really have to involve HR? Yes, you do. And the moment is definitely right. If you look at the trends from last year, so this was already 2016, it talked about HR embraces Agile, HR drives the Agile organization, and 2016 to welcome the acceleration of Agile outside of IT. So these things are happening. And because it's an iterative approach, the organizations that start out early are going to win early because they can get all these learning cycles. So you can either wait until someone else overtakes you, or you can start iterating and start evolving that. And here, remember, when you set up an Agile HR project, set it up as an Agile initiative and not as a waterfall project. I know this seems very obvious, but I'm telling you from personal experience in many different organizations that it's sometimes hard to translate all those values and principles and practices into a different space, and it's sometimes easy to fall back into old patterns. So make sure to say, okay, we set them up for success. We set them up like an Agile initiative. So really get the trigger. We heard from Pete this morning, get the pain point. For some people, it's performance management. For others, it's bonus systems. For third ones, it's how do we create career in an Agile space. So get that pain point from a HR perspective. Talk to HR what Agile can bring to the table and get it started. And then just initiate, educate people, start with a strategic backlog, do backlog refinement, lightweight business case, and then just iterate. Just show them that you can learn and adapt and try out certain things. And of course, in HR, we have certain cycles that we can't break or not right away, but it also gives us a little bit of lead time. Like if we want to change our performance management system, we actually have a year to try out different things before we have to press that button and decide, okay, starting January 1st, we're going to have a different system. So it gives you a chance to do certain things. And if you have connected with your HR people, invite them in to come and see how you work. Invite them in to showcase how great Agile is, because you have to experience Agile. You can't just read about it and you get it. You really have to experience it. So include that part as well, and include your HR people. And I know that we sometimes get, well, my HR person is not getting it. I sent them an article on Agile and they don't respond. Well, how would you feel if your HR just sent you an article about your area of expertise? You would think, how dare they? So try to connect them on a personal level. And the person that you deal with may or may not be the right person for an Agile transformation. So you might have to scout the HR organization for people who are great. Those people sit in organizational development, compensation, talent management. So it's not your typical people that you would have interaction with. So make sure that you find those people. But they are eager to learn about these things if you approach it from a pain point. And remember, investing in your HR, in your people operations, is also an investment in your people. And that's a key part of it. And remember, to win the marketplace, you have to first win the workplace. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. And as I said, I'm going to be around if you have any questions.